Welcome to Spy Girls, where espionage meets real talk. Hosted by two former CIA operatives, Brittany Butler, myself, and former FBI special agent, Tracy Walder. We pull back the curtain on the world of intelligence, crime, and global affairs. From high stakes espionage to headline making investigations, we break it all down with expert insight, sharp analysis, and firsthand stories from inside the agencies. Get ready for a thrilling ride into the secret world of spies because the truth is always stranger than fiction. Okay, so we thought today would be a good episode to kind of dive into our backgrounds, how we got into intelligence in the first place, what our jobs were at the CIA and FBI. So, Tracy, why don't you kick us off and just kind of tell us about your background?
Well, sure. I'm just so excited about this. I think this is going to be awesome. I hope everyone enjoys it. And please feel free ask any questions in the comments. We love that, and that really helps us for future episodes as well. So I'm really excited. Yeah. So my journey to the CIA is a little bit different, and that's why I'm excited to share it because I think now I teach at the college level, and there's so many students who ask, what formula do I need to check off to get a job at the CIA. And I'm here to say it doesn't necessarily work like that. Certainly, things might help give you a leg up, like a foreign language, a specific major, but I am proof that none of those things helped me get a job at the CIA. So I am old, I guess, and I grew up at a time where we did not have exposure to pop culture like kids do today. We didn't have shows like Criminal Minds or Homeland, all the things. So I wasn't really exposed, quite frankly, to careers in these fields. I think James Bond was still Sean Connery, which,
Oh,
yeah, it really didn't appeal, like
yeah.
to me. I didn't have anything like that. I really wasn't exposed. And I just assumed it was all kind of older dudes, right, who worked in the Russia division
Mhm.
because that was the communist bloc had kind of fallen when I was in high school. And so that it wasn't something I was necessarily interested in. And so I had a really influential high school history teacher. I thought, I want to be a high school history teacher. My dad was a professor at USC, free tuition, yay. So I went to USC with my free tuition and I majored in history. But in 1997, I happened to be working out and I was watching CNN, and in CNN, they had two gentlemen. It was Peter Arnett and Peter Bergen, and they were interviewing this guy in a cave with two AK-47s next to him. And that guy turned out to be Osama bin Laden. And it was in that interview that he issued his declaration of war against the United States. So for me, I grew up with like the Oklahoma City bombing, Ruby Ridge, Waco. That was my perception of terror because I guess being a self-centered 19-year-old in college, I
Sure.
think I think I assumed all the Al-Qaeda attacks at that point in time were happening mainly in the Middle East and Africa. They were pretty much contained there. And so I think when you're just thinking about yourself, quite frankly,
Yeah.
I wasn't exposed to
Yeah.
that. And so, I mean, Okada wasn't even born until 1989. So it was still like new. And so I thought I wanted to learn, like, who is this guy? Like, what's his deal? What does he believe in? Kind of all of those things. But USC is a great school. But at that time, this is the mid 90s, we did not have like counterterrorism majors, right? Like now we
Right.
do. They're all over. And so I took classes on like modern Middle Eastern history. I took introduction to Islam, whatever I could to like learn
Mhm.
about this topic. And I really still didn't know that you could like have a career working this. And so
Mhm.
my roommate, this was during, I guess, the dot-com boom. Everyone was getting a job working in these, dot-com jobs.
Mhm.
My roommate was like, Tracy, let's go to this career fair. It's a dot-com career fair. And I'm like, why would I want to do that? I have zero interest in this career. But I am applying for a job, excuse me, an internship in Washington, D.C. I'll bring my resume and take my bike and just kind of go through with you on my way to the Career Center. And I saw that there was a table. It said CIA. And at that point, they were looking for liberal arts majors. So I was a history major. And I don't know what possessed me to go to the table and ask the recruiter, do you work this counterterrorism thing? And he
Mhm.
said, it's a very small group, again, pre 9/11. So it's a very small group. And he
Yeah.
said, their focus was mostly Russia because, I mean, Russia's always gonna Russia, right, Brittany?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know.
I don't know anymore, but and Latin America, because there was just a lot of coup d'etats, counter narcotic stuff going on there, and they were looking for Russian and Spanish speakers. I don't speak any foreign language. I literally gave him my resume and continued on with my day and gave it zero thoughts
Yeah.
until I got a phone call and I started the application process when I was a junior in college, and then got my conditional offer of employment my fall semester of my senior year, but it was conditional upon my graduation. And so I graduated, and then, gosh, 2 weeks later, so this would have been May of 2000, I started at the CIA. And I'm sure you know this, like at CIA, you don't tell them like where you're going to work. It's the
Right.
government. They put you where they
Right.
think you'll be like the best fit. And so I knew
Right.
I probably wasn't going to be an analyst. I don't have a PhD or a master's in a very specific subject matter. No one wants me doing anything with math and science. So I didn't think that science and technology was going to be a place I was going to go.
Yeah.
So I ended up in the Directorate of Operations, and I got even luckier. I got put in the Counterterrorism Center, which at the time, everyone in my class when I EOD'd was like, why would you want that? That's not where like the action is.
It's
And I know that's weird because it's a pre 9/11 world. So we have to
yeah.
remember it just wasn't the cool topic of the day. And so that's where I was before September 11th, and then during and after. And that's my story. Sorry, it's long winded.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Everybody's journey, like you said, is so different in getting there. And every time I talk to someone different, that came into the CIA, their story is completely different from the next. I think a lot of times people think that you have to go to an Ivy League school. At least that was kind of my impression from like watching movies and, reading books and everything, that you had to go to Harvard or Yale. And it used to be like back in the OSS days, the precursor to kind of CIA, they did heavily recruit from the Ivy League schools. And it was very much like this good old boys network. And it still is to a large extent. Like I was brought into an office my first day of work, and this woman I worked for was like, I don't understand what you're doing here. You went to a state school. Like, why are we recruiting? I know. She's like, what? You went to Florida State? I don't understand. Yeah, it was really weird. But yeah, so my journey to the CIA was, a little different in that I did an internship at the American Embassy in Paris my junior year of college. And
An
I always
internship.
really interested. Yeah, like I was really always just like interested in working abroad, living abroad, learning a foreign language. I just thought that would be so fun and exciting. And I studied French. I majored in international affairs. I still think if you're looking for a career at the CIA, it's really important to get that international experience and pursue degrees in like Russian studies, Chinese studies. I feel like a lot of people listening to this podcast might be thinking like, how can I get in? And I just spoke with someone yesterday that she's really looking to get into the intelligence community as well. And I really try to push them in the direction of those type of programs. So yeah, so I studied international affairs, went to the American Embassy in Paris, worked in the passport section, and that was a really cool experience because I got to see what it looks like to be a foreign service officer, which is what I thought I wanted to be. I thought I wanted to go into the foreign service, but after working there for a couple years, and this is in 2004, so a couple years, kind of after 9/11, but things were still very intense in terms of like watching to make sure the wrong people didn't get into the country. And so I was involved in a passport fraud case where someone was using a fake passport trying to get into the country. And because I had some knowledge of Arabic naming conventions because of my degree, I was able to identify an individual trying to get into the country that had some nefarious connections, had some terrorist connections. So I pointed this out to my bosses at the State Department. I didn't know at the time that they were undercover CIA. And they were like, hey, like, and they didn't tell me like at this time that they were undercover. They're like, have you ever thought about applying to the CIA? And it just never occurred to me. I thought, again, like my perception of movies and TV was like that they hired, all dudes basically from like Ivy Leagues, type of education. So it never occurred to me, but I just applied on the website. And that's what I encourage everybody to do. If you're interested, just apply on the website. And I was interested just from reading initially in the case officer position and the director of operations. So for those of you who don't kind of understand the way CIA works, I think it's helpful to know that there are different directorates that do different things. So director of operations is where Tracy and I worked, and that's where like all the clandestine work happens. That's where the officers are actually going out and recruiting the spies and running assets and doing that kind of work. The Directorate of Intelligence is where all the analysis happens, and that's like where like actually there are quite a few Ivy League grads there. That they're doing kind of more of that analysis, strategic level analysis, and they're informing our policymakers about the intelligence that we're collecting in the Director of Operations. So that's kind of like a side note there, but I think it's important to understand those differences. And when you're hearing about our experiences and coming on board at the CIA, so I was recruited to be a case officer. So initially, when I interviewed with the CIA, I was talking to retired case officers, people who had worked in the industry for a long time. And what I discovered during that process was that I wasn't quite ready to take on the case officer responsibilities. To a large extent, you really have to commit to that first 10 years of your career living and working overseas. And I just, having talked to a lot of like the psychologists and the former case officers, I'm like a little Southern girl from Georgia. Like I was like, I want a family still, and I want to get married and all this stuff. So I just kind of discovered, maybe this is not the right path, the case officer track. So I decided to take on a position, and they thought I would be best suited in a targeting position where that's an ops officer position, but you're doing more of the targeting analysis, where you could do targeting for recruitment operations. So targeting to try to find those penetrations of like Al Qaeda, terrorist groups, or a foreign government, helping to, develop what we call targeting packages, which, we deliver overseas to like our bases and our stations to provide operational leads on this individual that would be good to recruit for the CIA. And then also doing targeting packages to support our either drone program or our special forces programs or paramilitary operations, primarily in the war zones. So targeting packages on high value targets that we're looking at to detain. So yeah, that's kind of my little spiel. I was in a couple years after Tracy, so I feel like it was really kind of, I don't know if you'll agree or not, Tracy, but like a different experience in that like the counterterrorism center was huge. Like it was like exploding. And they put me originally in a CTC Iraq. This was like 2006. And, we were doing this huge surge to try to fix things over there, still not really understanding what our job was there. It was a really weird time, right? We were getting directives from the Bush administration saying like, hey, like where are the weapons still? And we were like, there are no weapons of mass destruction. And so it was like a really weird time. But then we also were dealing with Al Qaeda, being really active and flourishing in that country. And so we were, of course, we're going after Al Qaeda in Iraq. There were some other extremist groups. Ansar al-Islam was one of them at that time. And so kind of like a different kind of, but it was interesting. I don't know if you agree with this or not. I don't know if it was like this when you were in there, Tracy, but CTC Iraq department was kind of like where you learned to become a targeter, and then you kind of graduated to CTC Pakistan, Afghanistan division. So at that time,
that goes back to the fact that of when I started. So we didn't have targeting officers. Targeting officers is a very new position. So targeting officers did not exist until probably about 2003, 4. It wasn't a position that you could have. It wasn't a position that you could apply for. So I think we have to remember that these positions change over time. It wasn't a position that was even available. So I was on the OO track until they added a new position called an SOO. And that didn't even start until after September 11th. So the CIA is always changing in terms of how they're doing that. And so I really can't speak to the targeting piece because it didn't exist. I know that's really strange. It didn't exist. And so for me, I worked obviously in the counterterrorism center. I was the first person to fly the drones. And so it was a weird position to be in because everything was so fluid. We were so
Mhm.
small. We were
Yeah.
so small. And so,
Yeah.
I didn't, after I rotated off drones, everything was so in flux. No one was going on 2-year TDYs, like, no, because they didn't have time for us to all be gone. No one was going to
Right.
language school because they didn't have time for us to all be gone. And so
Yeah.
it was such a weird time to be there.
Yeah.
I transitioned into CTC WMD, but we have to remember we're not talking about Iraq. I had nothing to do with Iraq. I never worked Iraq. I didn't want to.
Mm. Yeah.
My passion was Afghanistan. And so my original target was Zarqawi. My group
Mm.
was the first people to work him. And then we
Oh,
had to hand him off to
okay.
Iraq, which was very frustrating for us.
Yeah.
We never.
Wait, tell everybody who Abu Musab Zarqawi
Oh,
is.
I'm sorry. Zarqawi is, well, initially, actually, he was bin Laden's poison guy. That's what bin Laden hated him. And so I think bin Laden was like, hey, go do something else, please.
Yeah.
And get out
Yeah.
of my
Wrote a
hair.
sign for Iraq.
And get out of my hair. And so
Yeah.
I think bin Laden, Zarqawi then became this guy that was responsible for explosives and poison attacks in, Western Europe, Africa, kind of all over there. But then obviously Iraq became power vacuum right after Hussein was taken out, all of that. And to be honest, I think Zarqawi wanted to do his own thing, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word. And he saw that there was a very destabilized place in
Mhm.
Iraq. And
Mhm.
so let's start Al Qaeda in Iraq, which
Mhm.
obviously we know um, morphed in to ISIS, obviously later, which is probably, it's so cool to see the two of us because it was like
Mhm.
we met kind of in this
Mhm.
middle
Yeah.
time, right? And so it's like this before and this after. And I
Yeah.
think that's actually kind of neat. But I
Yeah.
think it's really also cool that the CIA is always developing these new jobs, right?
Mhm.
And you are proof of that, and I am proof of that, just in two
Mhm.
different kind of time frames. And so what's cool is that there's like something for everyone, if you,
Mhm.
and I know like you had that background of international affairs, but what's so interesting is now I'm an adjunct faculty at a university, and I have
Yeah.
a student right now who is actually in the interview process with CIA, and we
Oh,
text
great.
all the time. And
Great.
she's an English major with no language skills whatsoever.
Wow.
And when
Wow.
I reflect on what got me in, because obviously I'm sure the CIA never really like told you, hey, Brittany, this is why.
Yeah, this is why I
Yeah,
just kind of thought,
I
yeah.
don't think anyone ever told you, like sat
Yeah.
you down and told you that. But
Right.
I
Right.
know students get so mad at me. Soft skills are so important.
Yeah.
Logic, critical thinking,
Right.
all of those skills, we like forget that it's
Mhm.
important.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think I don't want people to forget that, I
Yeah.
guess. I
It's
don't
not
know.
about the degree. And I'm sure, I think Tracy and I have talked about this a little bit, but we both get a lot of flack from like people online. Sometimes they're like, wait, you have blonde hair, you're like engaging, you're nice, you smile a lot. You must be lying. You must be an analyst, you must be a secretary at the CIA. But wait, what I don't think people understand, they want personable people, like people who can talk to others and that you want to talk to and that you want to trust. And so if I'm like a total stoic, like the James Bond kind of a deal, that's not a case officer at the CIA. Like that is not what they're looking
Sense.
for. They need people that are very personable and that have those soft skills that Tracy is talking about. So yeah, that cannot be, I don't think, overstated enough that that's critical. That's really critical. So it's really weird and interesting when people are like, "Oh, well, you must have just been a secretary." I'm like, "Why?" Because I was in a sorority and I have blonde hair. Like, and I also think there's an element, and I don't know if you'll agree with this or not, Tracy, but like they probably don't want someone who would look like they would be a spy. Like, I don't think anybody would. A lot of times when I would go into meetings in the Middle East, like they'd be like, "Wait, what? You work at the CIA?" Like they would never think of someone like me working at the CIA. And actually, I don't know if you've seen the show The Americans. I thought they did a really good job with this.
Yeah.
Like they like the woman who was like running the two main like kind of Russian KGB officers, you would never like she looks like a grandmother. Like you would never think of her as like a CIA or a KGB badass. You just would never think that. So yeah, I don't know.
You're
Like
totally right. I couldn't agree with
yeah,
you. Like
yeah,
I think, and this sounds so manipulative, Brittany, but like sometimes we use that to our advantage. At least I
right,
do.
right.
People underestimating me and not thinking, I'm sorry, my dog is barking. Let me
You're good. You're good.
apologies. He let
No,
himself in while we were talking.
oh, how lovely.
So,
Love it when
well,
that,
I guess that's our story.
yeah.
And I think we're gonna, try to post weekly episodes.
Mhm.
They will be more, I think, context in nature, national security, things that are going on. But we felt like this was just a good introductory episode to introduce you to us
Mhm.
and who we are. So I think we would love comments too about what you want to hear about from a national security foreign policy perspective. That would be helpful in terms of like guiding, our episodes each week.
Yeah, and if there's like stories you want, like we have some good stories, some funny stories about working at the CIA, like, ridiculous parties we were at and weird personalities we worked with. And I know those can be like lighter and more fun. And we're also both mothers. So we're happy to take on questions of like how we might use our CIA background in our parenting. So if that's something that's interesting to you, please leave a comment in the comment section. We're happy to answer your questions. So we're so glad that you've joined us on this first episode of Spy Girls. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Thank you guys.